Shabbat Shalom. Let me pose a question. What is the first thing that most Jews do on a Shabbat morning? And while you think about that answer, let me tell you about Friday nights growing up in the Mitchell household. As you may know, I had a strictly modern Orthodox upbringing. And like many families, we had a typical Friday night. Chicken soup, challah, a roast chicken, and at least one argument. But unlike most families, we rushed to be in bed by 10:30 p.m. ahead of that dreaded moment when the automated light switches would plunge the house into darkness. Yet I, ever the night owl, was wide awake. For years, I lay in bed resenting that it was pitch black. All I wanted to do was read a book. And by the time I was 16, I was in full-blown rebellion. I waited 15 minutes for the house to go silent before I turned on my small black and white TV, which was no bigger than a box of matzah. I'd then plug in a single-ear headphone so that I'd hear if anyone was approaching my bedroom. And most frustratingly, I'd have to do all this from under a thick duvet so that our pious and rather nosy neighbor would not see the heretical glare coming from my bedroom and report this clandestine breach of Shabbat to the rabbi, or even worse, to my mother. As a teenager, Shabbat felt more like a prison than a period of rest, which is why I cannot believe what I'm about to say to you. But before that, back to that question. What is the first thing that most Jews do on a Shabbat morning? The answer is check their phones, because the majority of Jews around the world are like us non-Orthodox and rely on smartphones to juggle their work life, social life, hobbies, their day-to-day existence. Now let me ask you another question. At a guess, how many times does Shabbat recur in the average lifespan of a Jew? Don't try and do the maths, especially not on your phones. Have a guess. The answer is surprisingly few, prompting the contemporary British journalist and author Oliver Burkeman to write a book called 4,000 Weeks. Just 4,000 Shabbats between our cradles and our graves. But the good news for members of this community is that our average lifespan is 89, so we may get to enjoy 4,628 Shabbatot, but even that number is terrifyingly finite. Recognizing this, Berkman challenges us to reclaim our sense of time by making every weekend count. He starts by discrediting the myth that technology enables us to be more restful. He quotes a 1930s lecture by the economist John Maynard Keynes, and the lecture is entitled Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And in it, Keynes made a famous prediction. Within a century, thanks to the advance of technology, no one will have to work more than a 15-hour week. Nearly 100 years later, how are those 15-hour weeks working out for you? Berkman explains that technology only makes us work even harder, and he supports this theory by recalling his own attempt to achieve inbox zero by batting back every email that comes to him. The problem was his efficiency. People soon realized that he would respond to everything, so they sent him even more emails. Running 3 inboxes, 2 mobile phones, text messages, voicemail, multiple WhatsApp groups, Facebook Messenger, LinkedIn, and a quaint thing called a landline, I too cannot keep up. Can any of us? The sorry truth is that technology is both our best friend and our worst enemy. Those magical black boxes that we carry in our pockets render us both master and slave. And before you think I'm only talking about young people whose parents battle to ration screen time, after Shabbat, I challenge you to go and Google smartphone addiction amongst silver surfers. As we know, the pandemic broke all the walls between home and work and all the boundaries between in-person and virtual existence. And those oh-so-smart algorithms were deployed by social media to feed us cookies 1 megabyte at a time. Zooming in on ourselves is what these days of awe are all about. This period requires us to face our flaws. So let's repent for the sin of phubbing, which the Oxford Dictionary defines as ignoring the person you're with in favour of your mobile phone. Technology might have saved us during the pandemic, keeping us connected and productive. But these wondrous tools soon became weapons of mass distraction. Ask any therapist, and you'll hear that mobile phones are causing a breakdown of marriages, of families, and of friendships. And as for young people, well, they're in real danger from overexposure to these devices. The epidemic of youth mental health makes them especially susceptible. They have no respite from content live streamed into their bedrooms, videos encouraging obsessive body image, relentless clickbait, virulent anti-Semitism, and worst of all, 24/7 Snapchat with friends and enemies, including cyberbullies. As rabbis, we have encountered far too many young people who have received digital messages invading the safety of their bedrooms saying, "If I were you, I'd kill myself." Friends, this is becoming a matter of life and death. But fortunately, there is a solution. We can look to our past. Our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. Once liberated, as we know, they stood at the foot of Sinai, accepting the 10 Commandments, including, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days shall you labor, but on the 7th you shall rest. And not just you, everyone in your household. It took a people who had experienced no respite, who had been harassed to death, to give the world a simple idea: a weekend, a sacred day of downtime, so that never again would their descendants be slaves to anything else which controlled every minute of their lives. Shabbat became their lifesaver. But times change. When historians look back at our era, they may label it the digital revolution. Not so different from the Industrial Revolution, when the world spun out of control. We too are living through a tumultuous period, traversing that shift from analog to digital. It's all happening so fast, from automation to AI, and we lack the time to master these shiny new tools and toys. Safety measures during the Industrial Revolution were an afterthought. Likewise, controls on these digital devices are still playing catch-up. It's overwhelming, but Shabbat is the solution. Now, I'm not advocating that we become 21st century Luddites, but I am imploring us to take back some control. As the contemporary American author Judah Shulevitz explains, most people mistakenly believe that all you have to do to stop working is not work. The inventors of Shabbat understood that it was much more complicated. You cannot downshift casually and easily the way you slip into bed at the end of a long day. Shabbat is, writes Judah Shulevitz, exactingly intentional. The rules do not exist to torture the faithful. They are meant to communicate that interrupting our ceaseless striving requires a surprisingly strenuous act of will, one that has to be bolstered by habit. In other words, self-discipline. Across the past decade, there have been calls for a digital detox. Jewish self-help gurus leapt on Shabbat. Disconnect to reconnect. Switch off for Shabbat. Slow down. Unplug. But I'm afraid that doesn't go far enough. We need to restore digital discipline. And there's no better way to do this than Shabbat. Not the Shabbat of my youth, with its 25 hours of black and white technological restrictions, but by opting in, as progressive Jews, to just 2 intentional Shabbat measures. The first is for us to reclaim Friday nights, to ensure that whether it's a weekly family meal or a dinner with friends, there will be no screens tolerated at the Shabbat table, and that after the meal, we will remain self-disciplined enough to stay away from our inboxes, social media, breaking news alerts, and every other distraction, so that we are fully present until we go to bed. That doesn't mean we can't watch a TV show together with our family or play music with our friends. It just means that anything which detracts from making our Shabbat feel special, and certainly anything which involves work, has to, for one night, take a back seat. On a Shabbat, let's go to bed without that residual blue light, which keeps our brains hardwired for up to an hour after we've drifted off. Likewise, rule 2. Let's be intentional when we wake up on Shabbat morning. Let's give ourselves at least a full half hour before we switch back on, thereby reinforcing the digital boundary of the night before. Ahad Ha'am, the great early Zionist ideologue, famously said, "More than the Jew has kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jew." In his view, the act of keeping Shabbat sustained our very Jewish identity. And I want to go a step even further. In this digital age, keeping a progressive Shabbat won't just keep us safe, it will keep us together as families. But I'm not saying let's become orthodox and ban all technology, never logging into an online service, Shabbat Shalom to you, those of you on the live stream, or driving to synagogue. I wonder how you all got here. On the contrary, the prophet Isaiah calls Shabbat oneg, a delight. So anything which enhances your Shabbat, from attending synagogue to playing bridge online with your friends, to watching the football, or going to a matinee, all these things should make your Shabbat both delightful and kadosh, holy, special, and different from the other days of the week. We badly need these things in our life precisely because they're restful and peaceful. In contrast, anything which is neither restful nor peaceful needs to be curtailed on Shabbat. Digital discipline does just that. And if I still haven't convinced you, Leslie Perlow, a professor at Harvard Business School, ran a study with a team of high-powered consultants. She made them turn off their devices for one night each week. At first, she faced huge opposition from those oh-so-busy people, but soon the participants followed along and reported feeling happier, more satisfied with their work-life balance, and less disempowered. We too can gain so very much via the digital discipline of Shabbat. And there's a good reason why Rabbi Helen and I began today's service by wishing you first Shabbat Shalom and then Shana Tova. Shabbat always comes first because it is the most important festival in our lives. Rosh Hashanah, with its resolutions, is of course a high and holy day, but unless those New Year resolutions become habitual, applied each and every week, then they will soon be forgotten in this era of information overload. Friends, Shabbat practice is liberating. I've seen how beneficial switching off can be for my Orthodox relatives, which is why we need to go back to the future and solve a modern problem with an ancient solution. The teenage boy who deliberately broke Shabbat is now asking you to keep it. Why? Because we know only too well the answers to those two questions. What is the first thing that the majority of Jews do on a Shabbat morning? And even more importantly, how many Shabbats do we get in our lifetime? On this first Shabbat of the new year, let's resolve to sanctify one night each week and 30 minutes the following morning by putting aside our devices, prioritizing our loved ones, and making each and every one of those scarily finite Shabbats truly, truly count. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.